Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. I'm Hallie Tecco.
I'm Michael Esquivel.
And I'm Steve Krause. And every Monday, we bring you the latest in healthcare innovation as we sit down with entrepreneurs and industry experts.
So buckle up and join us as we figure out how to improve healthcare for all.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. I am your host, Steve Krause, and today I'm excited to be sitting down with Dr. Brian Anderson, who is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of the Coalition for Health AI, which is also known as CHAI. CHAI is a nonprofit coalition established in 2021, and it's dedicated to developing consensus-driven guidelines and best practices for responsible artificial intelligence in healthcare. Obviously, this is a hot topic, Brian. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. So thanks for joining us on the Heart of Healthcare.
Absolutely excited to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me.
I gave a little bit of preview for our listeners, but Brian, why don't we start? And can you describe pretty succinctly what CHAI does and what its role in the ecosystem is?
Yeah. So when we first started CHAI back in the middle of the pandemic, we looked at AI. And I think one of the initial questions that started CHAI was, do we have consensus at a technically specific level that informs what responsible AI actually means for a software developer, for a health system implementing it? The answer we quickly came to is we don't. And so that's been our North Star, building consensus-driven, private sector-led best practices, standards, if you will, on what responsible AI looks like for health.
I guess I'd ask you, there's lots of different stakeholders in healthcare, lots of different interest groups, private sector, public sector, health systems, payers, innovators. I mean, the list goes on and on. Is it possible to form that consensus, or where are we in the process of forming that consensus?
I think as many of our members like to remind one another, consensus does not mean unanimity. And so it doesn't mean that we have a unanimous agreement on what any one technical standard looks like. It means that we have, in general, a agreement on, whatever the specific standard is that we're looking at. And so it is hard work. I'll readily admit that bringing together, as an example, the technology vendors, the builders of AI, and the customers of AI, namely health systems, doctors, nurses, and payers, to agree on, as an example, something like what is the minimum threshold for transparency that a vendor should share in terms of how the model was trained or what its performance was. That's not easy, right? Because I think appropriately, a technology company doesn't want to disclose their IP. And so how do you share how a model was trained and, some level of detail about the data sets used without revealing the secret sauce, the IP that vendor is building their company on? But at the same time, you have health systems, right, that currently in the current regulatory framework and legal framework, they're the ones that if something goes bad, if AI hurts someone, the doctor, the health system is the one holding the bag at the end of the day. And so they have a strong motivation to only want to use tools that are safe and effective. And so how do you balance those two equities, right? And that's an example of part of the challenge, but it's not insurmountable.
I think you outlined and you guys put out a pretty detailed sort of guidelines and frameworks for how to think about developing this consensus across a number of different parameters. But if I were to boil it down, I think I saw 5 key parameters. It was usefulness, usability, efficacy, number 1, fairness 2, safety 3, transparency, which you just spoke to, and accountability 4, and then security and privacy 5. What do you think of those 5? What do you think the most challenging will be to build consensus, if there is one?
So certainly transparency has been the hardest so far. And I think, when you think about how you start building trust, I think it starts foundationally with a level of transparency. So that was candidly, I think, why we started and focused on that one, is understanding how models are built is so important, because I think, as many of us appreciate, if you want a model to perform well on a particular population of people, ideally you would want that model to be trained on those kinds of people. And so understanding where models are trained, where the data comes from is really, really important, because data obviously is so important and influential in how robust, how accurate these models are. And so transparency is a critical one that we focused on initially. It's been the basis of the model cards that we launched last year. Model cards are essentially an AI nutrition label. If you pick up a can of soup at a grocery store, you turn it around, of course, you see kind of all the ingredients that go into it.
And what do you see on the model card?
Yeah, so there are 31 different categories of information that go into the model card that we developed. It is conformant to the HTI-1 standard that the US government came out with last year as well. So the inputs, right? What were the data sets used? What were the training methodologies used? Things like indications and limitations, right? What are the use cases the model should be used for? What are the use cases the model shouldn't be used for? And then importantly, and I think this is kind of one of the other areas that we focused on that is a real challenge, which is the performance characteristics. I think, many of the customers in Chai have been challenged when you, as an example, if I'm a health system, if you want to solicit the vendor community for a particular solution to solve, I'll take the ready example of ambient listening. I want, if I'm a health system, to have an AI tool that's going to make life easier for my nurses and doctors to codify their notes and electronically be able to get those into the EHR. So ambient listening technology is one of the more popular and exciting areas for AI. Understanding the accuracy and the performance of those models is really hard, right? Because how do you measure accuracy in a generative AI model for ambient listening? That's something we don't have agreement on, right?
Yeah. Like, what's your benchmark? Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's one of the other, I think, really big challenges, particularly in the generative AI space, is how do we get consensus agreement amongst the competitors in that space?
Can I push you on one thing? Because we do it, as you know, a bunch of investments in health AI space, and appreciate all the work y'all are doing. But I'm a little naive when it comes to some of these parameters. But let me take the 5 just to push you, right? Like, here's the naive statement pushback. I would think that if you had usefulness, usability, and efficacy, number 1, it was equitable and fair, number 2, it was safe in that it didn't hurt people. So it was both efficacious and safe, number 3, and you felt as a customer that your data was safe and private, which was the 5th. Why do you need the 4th? Like, is the bar in healthcare so high that we actually have to show transparency? Because like in all other parts of our world, if you got those 4 things, you'd be like, oh my God, and you'd be a killer consumer app, to be using an analogy in another industry. But here, like, why can't we have the 4 and not the 5th? Why is transparency so important if everything else works?
It's a fair question, Steve. A lot of our members, I would say, believe that trust starts with a common agreement on what good, responsible AI looks like, right? And I think if we start from that basis, that like we have a common definition of what good looks like. And then, right, if I am to trust you, the vendor, if I'm the health system, you need to show me that you actually are aligned with that good definition, right? And what I think many customers of AI would say is, you need to show me in a transparent way certain things that really matter, that tell me that you are aligned with what some of the comments that or some of the principles that you talked about, like fairness and equity and performance and accountability. The ability of a model to perform safely is highly influenced by the kinds of data sets or the kinds of people that model might have been trained on. The only way that I'm going to know if this model can be used on, if I'm a doctor, that this model can be used or should be used on a patient like the one I have in front of me, is going to be highly influenced by if I also know that model was trained on people like the one I have in front of me. And the only way I'm going to know that is if the vendors share some basic information about that. And so I would say each one of these principles certainly is reinforcing of the other, right? And so obviously transparency is reinforcing and leads to safety and efficacy. But if I'm going to understand the efficacy of a model, there's some basic information that you need to share with me. You can't just tell me this model is efficacious, right? And Scout's Honor I believe you, there needs to be some trust but validation. And that validation part comes with you sharing some insights, be it performance data or training data sets. It's not asking to reveal all of your IP if you're a technology vendor. It's more high-level information. So if you were to push me and say, could you get to responsible AI with minimal transparency? Possibly, but it doesn't build the kind of trust, I would assert, that you need if we want to use AI in some of the, what I would classify as higher risk settings.
I hear it may be the case that clearly this is a new modality for folks, right? It may be the case that in the early innings, which we're definitely in, you need the transparency, but over time, maybe the industry will be judged as success if there's such trust that you don't no longer need the transparency. It's like, okay, that the black box works as long as it's efficacious, safe, it's equitable, and I know that my data is secure and private. Like maybe that's where we get
Exactly. I mean, the example I use is electricity, right? Like I think when electricity first came out,
right,
people were very focused on how do we keep these wires from causing fires all over the place, right? And so everyone was very kind of interested in like, what is the thickness of the rubber insulation? And now when you and I, if we are doing a do-it-yourself project at our home, we go buy wire, do we worry about the thickness of the insulation? No, because we trust that it's sort of safe. We've come to trust this thing. And I do agree with you. At some point, AI is going to be performative, that it's going to be building that trust. It will be like the air we breathe.
You clearly don't know me well enough because my friends, my wife would say, would never let me touch electrical wire. That's a whole separate story. So question for you. We have a new administration with a lot of folks who are focused on AI at the senior executive levels. Like where are we in the formulation of regulatory policies and guidance around health AI?
Yeah. So it's been really exciting having the chance to sit down and meet some of the political appointees in leadership coming together within HHS, from leadership within FDA to CMS to ARPA-H and other agencies. I would say at a very high level, I think the interest in the current administration is more about how do we incentivize the use and development of AI in safe and effective ways by making infrastructure investments or creating accelerated pathways for regulatory approval. It's less about, what are new regulations that we can create. I think part of the concern, and I think appropriately so, is if we're creating regulations right now that are deeply technical and deeply specific, those are going to become sclerotic and candidly probably irrelevant in 1 to 2 years because of just the pace of AI. I think one of the things that I also remind our agency and elected officials is those of us in the private sector, we need time to come to consensus and build some of these best practices and standards that many of the regulations need to be based off of, right? We need to have a common definition about what good responsible AI looks like in the private sector before the public sector comes and builds deeply technically specific regulations on what that responsible AI looks like. If they were to do that ahead of the private sector, that creates a lot of potentially unintended consequences that are going to stifle innovation, that are going to lead to downstream consequences that could actually harm people. And so I'm excited that the current administration is very much invested in accelerating the kinds of innovation and making the investments that are going to lead to that kind of innovation. I'll give an example. There's a lot of interest about creating the kind of learning healthcare system that many of us in the space have been hoping for literally for decades that we haven't seen come.
What does that actually mean? What does a learning healthcare system mean?
It means, so at a technical level, it means healthcare systems, so like health systems, hospitals and clinics, making their data available in safe, privacy-preserving ways, but engineering the data such that a tech company can come to them and say, hey, I want to train a model that's going to service the people in rural Appalachia, Tennessee, or West Virginia. That data is not available right now. It's very hard to get. But the kinds of investments this administration is making so that an AI company can come to a health system that services those communities is now going to become more of a reality because that data, that kind of funding will be available for those health systems to make that data engineered in such a way that it is available for the tech company to come alongside and train a model that could then be used by those communities.
today, Brian, to educate our listeners, if you're creating it, and let's focus on clinical AI, because I think that's going to be the focus of much more regulation or scrutiny. If you're developing, the next generation Viz AI or what have you, the world in which you're operating in terms of regulatory guidance is software as a medical device, or what's the sort of paradigm under which you're operating to build your company?
Well, it's a great question. I guess the short answer is it profoundly depends on how your use case really actually is fleshed out. There's a whole bunch of different parameters. If you look at the FDA's regulatory framework for software as a medical device, it's very complex. It's like taking multiple layers of Swiss cheese and trying to see if the holes line up. And if the holes line up, then yes, you need to be regulated and you need to go through the FDA clearance process. But if they don't line up, as an example, ambient listening in Gen AI currently does not line up. So It does not need to be regulated.
Right.
But an algorithm that's used to give recommendation for sepsis as a diagnosis, well, that qualifies. But an algorithm that just gives references on where to go to look for diagnoses potentially for sepsis, that doesn't qualify. And so there's lots of different subtleties about the kinds of AI that you build and whether or not it qualifies to be regulated by software as a medical device within the FDA. And I think that's part of the challenge. I think there's been a lot of voices from the new administration about a desire to revamp and rethink, maybe redo the regulatory frameworks that the FDA uses for regulating AI to streamline it. As an example, I think I'll use the term, one of the more damning statistics in this space from the FDA, right, is right now from the previous administration, there's a lot of, I think, pride in that they've regulated and given regulatory approval to now over 1,000 medical devices that are AI. But if you survey radiologists today, where the vast majority, some estimates between 70 and 90% of those 1,000 devices are radiological use cases. So if you survey radiologists, how many of them actually use AI in their hospitals today? Less than 2%.
Wow.
That means that all of these companies are spending millions of dollars to get their radiology specific AI device approved. And then they've gone through all these hoops to create this tool, but it's not solving the needs of the radiologists today, right? Only 2% are using it.
So Brian, you've been an executive and entrepreneur, a doctor in several different platform shifts in healthcare, right? But the pace of adoption now in the health AI sector is unlike I've ever seen when it comes to technology. Like, it's real, and I'm sure you see it every day. So my question is, we're going to see AIs that can replace doctors, in certain instances pretty quickly. Vinod Khosla projected this 15 years ago, and I always used to sort of poo-poo it, but to his credit, he was right. It took a while, but he was right. And it's going to happen. So at some point, there has to be regulation formed around this, because the government can't stop consumers from using technologies. And at some point, robots are going to prescribe something to a human, and there's going to be a huge Wall Street Journal headline. So what do we do as an industry to get ahead of that? I mean, I know you're trying to do that, but it doesn't strike me like you got to find consensus, but you got to do it pretty quickly, or we have to do it pretty quickly. Otherwise, I think it'll be forced upon us because there's going to be negative headline stories. And healthcare is a great place for negative headline stories, as we know.
It is. And you're absolutely right. I would assert that, within the next 1 to 2 years, we're going to have agentic AI doctors prescribing medications for patients. And let me just say, I think that is a fantastic thing, right? So one of the more sobering characteristics or stats, in the medical education space is we have to replace over 200 physicians, 300 physicians some years that are committing suicide each year because of the burnout issue, because of the work-life balance challenges.
Wow.
Right? Doctors are leaving this industry. So we have a profound imbalance of supply and demand, right? We do not have enough doctors to meet the demand. We simply don't. And we're never going to be able to hire enough doctors to meet that demand. And so I would believe that the only real solution we have is to use the kinds of technologies at our disposal to be able to serve the patients that we currently can't serve, right? The people that are living in rural communities, the people that are living in inner city communities or living in tribal nations or places where there's no specialist for 100 or 300 miles, right? Those are the people that live shorter lives, that die unnecessarily because they don't get the kind of care that they need. An AI doctor could help address that, right? Like the example I like to use that excites me a lot. I'll take diabetes, right? A massive cardiovascular, cardiometabolic disorder that kills millions of people early. Yet we have, this really exciting technology with continuous glucose monitors that's giving a lot of data to be able to understand a person's blood sugar and the potential opportunity to change medication or adjust the dosing of the medication. Today, for a doctor to do that, that requires a visit. Maybe it requires, a telephone call. But as a physician, I'm not going to get to that telephone call for 72 hours, maybe 96 hours. A visit, good luck. That might be a month, 2 months, 3 months. An AI doctor that can consume that kind of data from a continuous glucose monitor that could reach out and engage a patient nearly instantaneously, adjust their medication nearly instantaneously, right? To empower that patient to take control of their disorder, their disease, to better live a life that is in control of diabetes is a reality that we're going to see within the next year or so. That's going to save thousands of lives.
Okay, so I'm with you. You preach to me. I agree. I'm converted. What's that? So let's do that. What has to happen? Because that sounds amazing.
Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, but let me kind of play this out for you. So I hope, and I think the current administration believes that the FDA currently has authority to be able to redo the software as medical device regulation. The FDA, I would believe, can say, we are going to start approving AI devices for prescription of medications with or without a doctor in the loop. That would be step one.
Would be key.
That would be key.
Yeah,
exactly. The next step would be at the state level. You need state medical boards to be able to agree to license AI tools for doing that, to prescribe medications. When you have a combination of state medical boards or the departments of health at a state level, and you have the FDA giving regulatory approval, those are the two key steps. And then you would need essentially to have a company that would be willing to make these products. Of course,
my God, there's going to be millions. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think the unanswered question, I think this will be interesting, is who is legally liable, to your point about the Wall Street Journal headline, if, the prescription is not done appropriately and it hurts and harms someone. Is it the technology company? Is it buyer beware? These are things that, I think we need to still work out.
Yeah, because I think I was at an event that you were at where that Zach Kahani put together up in Maine, where it sort of elucidated this issue for me, which is like, right now we live in a triad structure when it comes to software as medical device or AI, right? It's doctor, patient, software or AI, right? And to your point, you made the point earlier, it's the doctor or the health system the doctor works for that's liable. But you just posited that within a year or two, you think we're going to get to potentially a dyad structure where it's software and consumer or patient that are interacting. And okay, so the software is bought by the health system. Who's liable in that equation is actually a huge issue from like a medical malpractice legal perspective.
I think more scalable and perhaps more exciting option is disintermediate the healthcare system and go straight to the technology company that is engaging the individual as a consumer patient, right? And so, we all have mobile devices. We have the ability to get our healthcare information from our providers today, right? TEFCA, Trust Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, allows us to get our records from the EHRs that our health systems have. If I could take that information, bring it to a product company that has an AI tool, maybe it's for diabetes management, share with them, with my consent, my information, my continuous glucose monitoring information, and then that company, that product, prescribe, because it's been licensed by the state medical board, prescribes me or adjusts my prescription for my diabetes. Now suddenly there's not a health system in the loop, right? There's a product company that's managing. No,
I agree. Yeah, then they'd have to own the liability of that product company, though, right? Is your point?
Yeah.
Let's stick with this analogy for a second, because I've always wondered this. Is I think you'd agree, and you reference this. Like right now, if I had cancer, I would want a computer to read the image, computer vision to read the pathology side or the radiology side, powered by some AI model, right? I think it would do better than the doctors, and I respect doctors at DFCI, Dana-Farber, or Memorial Sloan Kettering, or whatever have you. I think that's almost indisputable in the research and literature, and yet it doesn't happen. And is that, to my mind, that's because of like the physicians associations, which are very powerful. It might be fair about that. I mean, you talked about a bunch of other stuff that has to happen. The FDA has to approve it, state medical boards, but let's just say we get those two things to go down your world in a couple of years, approve this, this whatever it is, software as a medical device for whatever special condition. Aren't the doctors going to rebel against this because it ultimately could be their jobs or their income? Like, how does this play out?
I mean, I think certain ones will, absolutely. Any new technology that's been invented, in the course of our history, you just have to look at things like electricity or the sewing machine, or, any number of inventions have disrupted different markets and created instability. And I think in this case, certainly physicians are going to have their workflows profoundly changed. Do I think physicians are going to be replaced? No. I think there's absolutely, going to be use cases and specific areas of focus for physicians for the foreseeable future. Do I think certain kinds of physicians are going to be reticent to adopt this kind of tooling? Yeah, absolutely. But, again, I would, probably within 2 to 3 years, physicians that aren't using AI are not going to be practicing to the standard of care, right? It's almost like saying a surgeon that's not using a scalpel, or a surgeon that wants to practice minimally invasive surgery, not using a laparoscope.
Right.
Like, that just doesn't make sense. Like, of course, minimally invasive surgery involves a laparoscope. Like, what surgeon wouldn't want to use that? And so they adopt it. It's just going to take time. And I think people in general, not just doctors, people are never really excited about change and disruption. It's scary. But over the course of history for physicians, our jobs have been disrupted all the time. I mean, like, you look at just all of the inventions that have been created in the past, 100 years, there's a multitude of them. And many of those inventions have led to better work-life balance for physicians. AI is going to be another tool like that. It's going to create a lot of new opportunities for physicians to focus on things that they want to focus on, and not spending time focusing on things that can involve us staring at computer screens.
Yeah, I mean, we're investors in a bridge, as you know, and I'm always amazed. It's amazing how fast adoption's been, even compared to EMRs. And now I meet like physicians, including like a dear friend of ours who is ENT doc, and she had a day where she had to see 40 patients. She was like, she was actually beside herself that her assistant booked that many. But then she's like, hey, Steve, I've got to go do 40 patients worth of notes the next day. And I was like, Stephanie, like, you got to get a scribe, like, and she's young and savvy, but it was like really interesting because I'm just amazed right now that doctors who don't have scribes, and by the way, the majority of doctors don't actually have scribes still. It's even though Abridge and Nuance and other companies have done great. Yeah, I think it's almost like, to me, I'm like, this is like the calculator, right? For our industry. So anyways, one question for you, because you posited this world of, I'll call it Dr. Google, or agentic prescribing doctor, which I think is really interesting to see your timescale on that. I hope that's the case. Who do you think wins that war? And let me put forth three potential winners, and you can add any you want to. One could be the health system that decides that they need to get smart and use these technologies to form a strategy, and whether it's with their own people or with outsourced partners, co-develop something like this. That's one. Two would be all the digital health companies that you and I know. Let's call them the innovators. The health systems are the incumbent. Let's call the digital health companies the innovators, the Bridges of the world, or whoever does this next, right? And the third would be big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Apple. Like, who do you think wins this war for Dr. Google?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's actually the companies that are building off of the scientific expertise that comes from the health systems. A technology company that tries to build something that is going to solve complex, high-risk use cases like complex metabolic disease management is not going to be successful if it doesn't have deep scientific expertise, not just in the pathophysiology of, what it takes to be a doctor, but certainly in the AI space. I've seen a lot of companies that haven't succeeded that didn't take the kinds of opportunities to partner with a health system that does have that kind of expertise to build that kind of solution set. And so, I would give you the third or maybe the fourth option, which is the bringing together of a technology company that employs, or maybe it's a JV, I don't know, but works closely, co-develops that kind of technology with a leading health system. I think those are going to be the companies that succeed. Why? Because that's how people experience trust when they see a doctor or an agentic doctor that deeply understands the issue and knows how to solve that problem for that patient in a way that that patient understands and can trust. And many times right now, that happens with a doctor that has been educated for decades. I don't think an agentic doctor that's built by a product company that doesn't employ those kinds of experts is going to succeed.
Super interesting. The report we just put out showed that, health systems, for what it's worth, really believe in the co-development strategy as a way to adopt and deploy these technologies. You referenced earlier, and I'm curious, I mean, you yourself are a doctor, you've been through medical training. What do you think the medical school curriculum looks like in a world where medical superintelligence exists? Like, what would you recommend? I mean, people, you're one of the more insightful people in this space. What do you think that looks like 10 years from now, 5 years from now?
Great question. I think the honest answer is I don't know. So just to be clear, when I think about superintelligence, I think about a world where you have AI models that have the ability to train other AI models, and they're all doing this at a deep PhD level or beyond in whatever field. So in this case, it would be the medical field. So, when you get to that level, I think one of the more immediate questions is, well, what does an MD then do if I have an AI model that is so deeply trained and is able to iteratively improve itself much faster than any human could, because you have AI training AI and doing really deeply technical things? What I look to is history in this case. The instances where, as a species, we've adopted different tooling and technology, and that technology has been widely scaled and widely impactful across all aspects of our society, have been in instances where we humans have figured out how to continue to use that tool that leads to a level of human flourishing beyond the current state of how we live our lives or the current state of how we practice medicine. So I've got to believe that in an era of superintelligence in medicine, the physicians to be in medical school, we will have developed the kinds of curriculum that will continue to allow doctors to flourish and patients to benefit and to flourish from that. But there will be a human in the loop in how that kind of medicine is practiced. Because at the end of the day, AI is a tool, and it's a tool being used by humans. And so we've got to figure out a way how to be in control of that tool.
Right.
This is part of the alignment problem that many of us in this AI space, I think, are concerned about, right? Because if we get to superintelligence and we haven't figured out the alignment problem, then we run the risk of humans not being in control.
I totally think this is like the really existential question, but when you say alignment here, Brian, what do you mean?
So, it's an important thing to talk through. So when I say the alignment problem, it essentially boils down to, are we ensuring that these models are developed and trained in such a way that they hold our values as the highest North Star that they have, right? Like, I don't want a model to be trained and developed in such a way that it's going to start working with my patients, but not understand from their perspective what it means to lead and live a full, complete life, right? If my AI model, my AI doctor doesn't understand how to do that, it's not worth being a doctor.
Right.
And right now, as we train and develop these models, there are all sorts of unintended consequences in the training of these models that we still need to figure out how to solve. And that is the alignment problem, aligning the ultimate outputs that these models are generating to the values that, in the case of medicine, that our patients and our doctors and our nurses, value.
Right. I don't know what time frame this is going to be, but this evolution is, humans are supreme, machines then evolve to be equal to humans, machines surpass humans, humans plus machines are superior to humans or machines alone. And then ultimately, like, machines then surpass humans maybe permanently, right? And then I think the question we're asking is, like, you make the point that humans need to adapt, or have proven over time to adapt, rework, and sort of find new positions.
That's right.
So, like, right now I have this great friend who's one of the leading neurosurgeons in his field. He does AVMs, right? Which is, you know what AVMs are. Like, if you have an AVM, you got to go see this guy. And he, like, uses his hands. He doesn't actually use robotics to, like, do these procedures. And he's, like, the best in the field at it. And I've always said, well, maybe MITRE won't ever get replaced because there's always going to be, but, like, ultimately, if you follow that lineage, it's like robotics plus AI, if it's superior, could actually replace the MITRE. And I guess the question, I'm just choosing my friend as an example of one of the most special doctors I know, like, what happens in that case, you know? And when is that?
I mean, it may be that, you know, when we think about the robotics and microsurgery, I think was what you're sort of getting at.
Yes.
That within the next few years, the technology and the ability for, robotic surgeries to be able to discriminate down to the, nanometer or micromillimeter area to be able to replace physicians in doing these surgeries. And that might be a cold, hard fact to many surgeons, but I think it is going to create disruption, no doubt about it, but it's going to create opportunities for providers to engage with their patients in new and meaningful ways. The challenge will be to find ways that continue to be meaningful and value to physicians. And there may in fact be surgeons that say, I don't find any value in this. Maybe there are neurovs out there that'll be like, if I can't put my hands on it and solve for an AVM, I'm out. But ultimately, we shouldn't be worried or too worried about whether or not physicians are going to be happy with whether or not they're doing AVMs. It's are the patient's going to lead better lives? Are the patient's going to have better outcomes with that? So I think that's going to be a reality in the robotics world.
This has been a fascinating conversation, Brian. I mean, we could probably go on for a couple more hours, but I guess I'll wrap it up. You strike me as a bull, and it probably makes sense given what you're doing for your career right now about the potential here. Paint for me the bullish case around health AI and the bearish case.
The bullish case would be agentic AI replacing most of the, what I would describe, non-physical kind of means of practicing medicine like surgery within the next two to 3 years. I think there's a lot of, high-risk use cases, particularly medication management in the ICU that's going to obviously take a lot of time in building trust and validating those models. But I think as you described earlier, something happened last year where we started seeing a lot of evidence and research showing that AI alone is better than doctors, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that was a big line that in retrospect, in a couple of years, we're going to look back and say like, that was a moment when AI really began to surpass doctors in some big categorical areas, like give me information and I'll give you the best output, how to manage your medication, how to take care of a diagnosis or a disease. I think that is going to be a really exciting area, particularly for chronic disease management in health. The bearish case is the federal government doesn't act, states act and create a onerous level of 50 different state regulations that lead to AI companies stifling their innovation, not investing in this space, and only a few markets really seeing the benefit, and the vast majority of people in the US really not seeing any benefit from AI for decades to come. I think that is closer to the reality, concerningly, because if you look at the number of state proposed bills on the docket right now, it's hundreds of them. And this is just within the past year.
Right.
And so we really need the feds to create that kind of regulatory framework that accelerates innovation but builds trust, right, through transparency. And if they can do that, and the states will slow down the patchwork of innovation, I think the bearish case won't come to reality and will be more aligned with the bullish case. But I am really concerned about where the states are going right now.
Fascinating. I've got a guy who's a private sector guy, has worked in the public sector, worked in between, wanting to have the federal government to act so that we actually have some clarity in how we adopt and create these technologies. It's a little orthogonal thinking, but I get it. Thank you, Brian, for what you're doing for our industry and what Chai's doing, and really appreciate having you come on The Heart of Healthcare. It was a fascinating conversation.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate the chance to talk with a venture capitalist like yourself and Bessemer Ventures. It's really important in Chai that we support our startups. And so I really appreciate all the work you guys are doing in the AI space as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, my friend.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Healthcare. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe. The Heart of Healthcare is produced by Hallie Tecco and hosted by Michael Esquivel, Steve Krause, and Hallie Tecco. The show is engineered, edited, and mixed by Kyle Moore. Visit our website, heartofhealthcarepodcast.com, for show notes and details.
In the time it takes you to actually board that flight from Group 8,
Now boarding Premier Altitude Elite Club members.
you could have bought a Hyundai on Amazon. Yes, that Amazon, where you buy everything else.
Mid-tier Altitude Elite, feel free to board now.
So while you're waiting for them to make up new boarding groups, you can order your dream car and the dealer will have it ready in no time.
Now boarding groups 1 through 7.
So close. Visit HyundaiUSA.com or call 562-314-4603 for more details. Limited availability, pickup through participating Hyundai dealer in select markets.